They cut my spillway to punish me, said I was the problem because I refused to join their HOA. But when the rains came and their streets turned into rivers, it wasn't me they called a threat anymore. It was nature. I warned them, showed them the maps, the flood paths, the risk. They laughed. So I reinforced my land, and I waited. And when the storm broke, it didn't just flood their playgrounds and basements, it swallowed everything their arrogance built. Now, the truth is out. The HOA destroyed the one thing that could have saved them. And the flood didn't just wash away their streets, it washed away their power. This is the story of how they tried to drown me in control and ended up underwater themselves. Nu bon, can phiên bon tiếng Việt bạn dịch tiếng Tây Ban Nha, hoặc bạn chia thành từng câu, để dùng trong AI voice tool như Video Pro hay 11 Labs. Chỉ cần nói nhé, I wasn't looking for trouble when I bought the land. I just wanted peace and quiet. After 27 years working with the Federal Water Management Agency, I'd had enough of city's politics and paperwork. I cashed out my pension, sold my place near the interstate, and bought a 5-acre parcel just outside the sleepy border of an HOA-controlled development in North Carolina. The land came with an old barn, some gentle hills, and most importantly, a natural runoff channel that once fed into a decades-old spillway. That spillway, a concrete trench built in the 70s, used to guide floodwaters away from the low-lying basin the HOA now sat on. I knew it well. I helped design it back when I was just an intern. The land wasn't within the HOA's jurisdiction. My deed county map and survey all made that clear. Still, from the day I moved in, I could feel the tension. Every walk to the mailbox brought glances. Every grocery trip felt like an ambush of fake pleasantries from tightly wound neighbors. I didn't decorate with fairy lights. I didn't mow my grass into perfect diagonals. And worst of all, I refused to join their homeowners association. They'll come around, I told myself. Just give them time. I spent the first month restoring the barn, adding a raised garden, and reinforcing the runoff culvert behind my property. It was the rainy season, and even small storms sent water rushing through the channel. One morning, I found a pamphlet stuck under my windshield wiper, Community Guidelines for Harmony. Welcome to Cedar Valley HOA. I ignored it. 2 weeks later, a man named Brad Whitmore knocked on my door. He wore a navy blazer, khaki pants, and a HOA badge like it meant something beyond petty control. Behind him stood a woman in a red power suit, Karen Delaney, head of the HOA board. "We'd like to talk," she said, crossing her arms. I stepped out, wiping my hands with a shop rag. "Go ahead." Karen launched into a rehearsed speech about community cohesion, property value protection, and voluntary integration. She praised my land's aesthetics, called it a natural extension of their neighborhood, and said it would be so lovely if I join. "No thanks," I said politely. Her smile barely twitched. "Why not?" "Because I like doing things my way," I replied. "Always have." Brad chimed in. "You'd have access to our facilities, voting rights, block parties. I'm not interested in parties. And I don't need a committee telling me what color to paint my shed." Karen's expression hardened. "Well, Mr. Merrick, without a shared drainage plan, you could become a liability during storms. Runoff needs coordination, shared responsibility." My eyes narrowed. The spillway was designed for that. It's perfectly functional. Karen blinked. "Spillway behind my barn. It used to run straight into your retention pond before y'all landscaped over half of it." They exchanged glances. Brad cleared his throat. "That trench hasn't been maintained for years. I just cleared it last month." Karen's voice turned icy. "We'll be watching for any issues, Mr. Merrick. Safety is our top concern." "Mine too," I said, and shut the door. Over the next few weeks, the pressure grew subtle but steady. My mail was delayed. Trash pickups skipped my drive. Someone reported me for unauthorized land grading even though I was just terracing my vegetable beds. County inspectors shrugged it off, but the message was clear: the HOA didn't like outsiders. Then came the noise complaints. One night I ran my generator during a storm. I woke up to a citation on my porch signed by the HOA security committee. A few days later, my dog barked at a raccoon near midnight. Another complaint. But I stayed calm. I logged every interaction, documented every message. Years in federal service had taught me never react emotionally. Just build your case quietly. Then something happened I couldn't ignore. It was a Tuesday morning. I'd gone out to check the drainage channel after a heavy rain. To my shock, the water wasn't flowing. The normally rushing stream behind the barn was stagnant, muddy rising, and slow. I grabbed my boots and flashlight and walked the length of the channel. Near the midpoint where the spillway pipe angled beneath the fence line, I found it fresh dirt, dislodged concrete, and a series of large stones jammed into the opening. Someone had buried part of the spillway. I crouched down and touched the dirt. It was loose, recently moved, not by erosion by human hands. A cold anger surged through me. I took photos, measured depth, then hiked down into the HOA's territory to see what had changed on their side. That's when I saw it they'd landscaped over the lower spill basin. What used to be a rocky runoff path was now part of their new community greenbelt, complete with benches and mulch. They'd blocked the emergency drainage on purpose. I went straight to the next HOA meeting. They wouldn't let me in. "We don't allow non-members to attend board sessions," Karen said at the door. "I have evidence of a safety violation. You've obstructed the original spillway, and it will flood your own homes." She crossed her arms. "That spillway is not part of our jurisdiction, but it drains your floodplain. That's not our concern anymore. You should have joined when you had the chance." I stepped back stunned. They weren't just ignoring the risk, they were weaponizing it. I spent that night sitting on my porch watching the rain clouds gather over the distant hills. My land sat on a mild rise. Theirs was a bowl. Without the spillway, every gallon of water would funnel toward their manicured lawns, cul-de-sacs, and clubhouses. I pulled out the old county floodplain maps from a metal file box. The predictions were clear. They'd sealed their fate, and they didn't even know it yet. And I wasn't going to lift a finger. Not this time. 3 days after that storm, I woke up to silence. No birdsong, no wind. Just that strange muffled hush you get when the earth is holding its breath. I brewed coffee and stepped out onto the porch. From there, I could see the spillway channel behind the barn, still clogged. The water had receded a little, but only because the rain had paused. I walked out with my boots and flashlight again, retracing the channel. That's when I noticed something new. The grass just off the main trench, trampled. Deep tread marks. Not from a tractor or my own wheelbarrow. These were pickup tires, fresh. The earth was still soft and hadn't dried from last night's drizzle. Someone had come onto my land, again, and this time they'd left something behind. Half buried in the mud near the damaged section of the spillway was a torn piece of navy blue plastic-like part of a contractor's tarp. Further up the hill, I spotted a broken stake, the kind used to hold erosion cloth. A bit farther still, a crumpled HOA name, badge damp, but legible. Security Committee, Brian Mendez. I'd seen him at the meeting. He was the guy who called the dog bark a threat to neighborhood harmony. I picked up the badge, wiped it off, and smiled without humor. So they weren't even trying to hide it anymore. That afternoon, I drove down to the HOA's greenbelt, the area they'd landscaped over the lower flood channel. A few neighbors were out walking dogs or trimming hedges. I parked and walked along the new mulch path. The transformation was striking. Where there once had been rocky terrain and drainage grates, now there were picnic benches, a low flower bed, and a pergola with Cedar Valley Serenity Space carved in metal letters. It would have been charming if it weren't a flood funnel waiting to happen. I followed the path to the lowest point. Sure enough, the runoff used to exit here, flowing into the county's storm reservoir. Now blocked. The culvert pipe had been capped with concrete, not patched, intentionally sealed. No permits posted. No signs of city work. Just HOA stonework, stamped with their logo as if they were proud of their vandalism. And then, I saw Karen. She stood under the pergola with a tall iced coffee in hand, chatting with Brad and 2 younger board members. She wore the same red blazer, the same smug look. I walked right up to them. "Afternoon," I said. Karen turned slowly, sizing me up. "Mr. Merrick, can we help you?" I tossed the muddy badge at her feet. "You're trespassing and sabotaging federal flood infrastructure. That badge was left on my land." She didn't flinch. "I don't know anything about that." Brad shifted. "You shouldn't be here, Russell. This is private HOA space. This whole thing," I waved my hand at the pergola, was built over a designated spillway. You've blocked a flood outlet that drains half this valley. Karen sipped her coffee, and yet no one's flooded. Yet I said, one more storm and your greenbelt becomes a retention pond. Your houses will be the shoreline. A younger board member muttered, "This guy's crazy." I locked eyes with Karen. You've turned a hydrological safety system into a picnic spot. That's criminal negligence. She leaned forward slightly. It's only negligence if someone gets hurt. Otherwise, it's just re-landscaping. And with that, she turned and walked away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying her words, the tone. That smug certainty that the system would protect her, that her HOA badge gave her immunity. But she didn't understand who she was playing with. I wasn't just some crank with a barn. I was the guy who used to audit disaster zones. I'd stood on broken levees in Louisiana, measured silt depth in Arizona runoff basins, helped FEMA revise their 100-year flood maps after Hurricane Irene. And now I was watching a preventable disaster being manufactured right in my backyard. I got up, turned on the floodlights, and pulled out my old topographical maps. Then I opened my laptop, accessed the county GIS system, and began overlaying recent construction permits. As I suspected, no approval for the capped culvert, no EPA review, no city drainage plan filed, but I wasn't done. I logged into the Public Emergency Alert database and checked the week's forecast. A tropical depression was forming off the Gulf heading our way. It would hit in 4 days, not a hurricane, but heavy enough to prove everything I'd said. The next morning, I began quietly preparing. I dug out the old sandbags I'd saved from my FEMA days, reinforced my own culvert lines, cleared every leaf root and rock from my section of the spillway, even though I knew water wouldn't get far with the HOA blockage. Still, I'd protect my land. Let them drown in denial. On the second night, as rain began to fall again, I saw headlights in the distance. A truck pulled up near the edge of my field. I cut the barn lights and watched from the shadows. 3 figures stepped out. They carried flashlights and shovels. They weren't county workers. I snapped photos, faces, plates, tools. At one point, one of them stumbled and fell directly into the channel. The others laughed and helped him up. Then they worked together to jam more debris into the trench opening. Rocks, branches, even plastic sheeting. When they were done, they patted each other on the back like they'd accomplished something noble. Then they drove off. I waited until dawn, then climbed down and inspected the damage. They'd destroyed the mouth of the spillway completely, cemented over the pipe, piled logs on top, made it look like a natural debris field. It was sabotage, plain and simple. But this time, I had everything: photos, footage, names, timeline, weather, data maps, and motive. Now I just had to wait for the rain. Because when it came, and it would, their entire plan would collapse under the weight of their arrogance. And I'd be ready. 2 days before the storm hit, a letter arrived taped to my fence. It wasn't from the city, not even from the county. It was official HOA stationery, printed in glossy ink, with their leafy green logo embossed at the top. The message, however, was far from professional. Notice of violation. Unauthorized water diversion, Mr. Merrick. It has come to our attention that recent alterations to your property's drainage systems have adversely affected Cedar Valley HOA. You are hereby instructed to cease and desist any further tampering with water flow infrastructure. Continued negligence may result in legal action. Cedar Valley Board of Directors, C.C. Karen Delaney, HOA President. I stood there reading it 3 times. They were blaming me. I'd spent the last 2 weeks trying to clear the runoff channels they had sabotaged, and now they were accusing me of water diversion. I looked around, half expecting cameras. It felt like a twisted joke, but it wasn't. Later that morning, a white SUV with the HOA logo on the side rolled past my driveway. I watched from my porch as a man inside took photos of my barn, my garden, and the drainage ditch near the fence line. Brad. He lowered the camera just long enough to give me a smug little wave. I didn't wave back. Instead, I pulled out a manila folder from my workshop and started compiling the satellite images from last year, showing the original spillway, the new photos I'd taken of the blocked pipe screenshots, of weather radar predictions, the video of the 3 men tampering with my channel, and now this letter. Let them try to make me the villain. I was building a case stronger than cement. That afternoon, I drove to town and visited the county water management office. I knew a guy there, Derek Shaw, a junior hydrologist, who still called me Mr. Merrick, out of habit. He'd interned with me years ago. Russell, he blinked. Didn't expect to see you back in the trenches. Technically, I never left the mud, I said. With a tired smile, then laid the folder on his desk. I need an unofficial opinion. He flipped through the photos, frowning deeper with each page. When he saw the concrete cap over the old culvert, his eyebrows shot up. Is this real as rain? I said. Who did this, the HOA? He exhaled hard. They didn't file a single alteration request with the county, not even a notification. And this was part of a mapped flood diversion corridor from '78. It may not be active, but it's still protected under state code. I thought so, I said. And now they're accusing me of rerouting runoff. He looked up. Russell, if this storm hits like the forecast says, and they've blocked that channel, their retention systems won't hold. I know, I said. I designed them. Derek looked shaken. You need to report this, formally. I will, I said, after the rain. Back home, things were heating up. Literally. The storm's outer bands brought hot, humid pressure. Clouds swirled low on the horizon. The wind carried tension like nature itself was grinding its teeth. The birds had vanished, and the HOA had kicked into full PR mode. Karen sent out a community-wide email blast titled Urgent Water Safety Threat from Neighboring Property. She claimed that a non-compliant landowner was disrupting the natural flow of drainage, putting Cedar Valley homes at risk. She urged residents to stay alert, promised the board was working with local authorities, and even included a low-resolution satellite photo of my barn with a red arrow pointing to the spillway circled in dramatic red ink. By nightfall, the neighborhood Facebook group was on fire. He's always been anti-community. Why won't he just join and fix the issue? Someone should call the county. I heard he installed a moat drainage terrorism. I closed the app and poured myself a whiskey. Let them scream. When the flood came, it would speak louder than all of them combined. The storm hit on a Thursday. It didn't arrive with a crash, it arrived with a growl. Low, steady sheets of rain began just after midnight and didn't let up. By dawn, my yard was soaked but holding. The water in the upper channel rose steadily, swirling around the rocks I'd placed to guide flow. Everything was working on my side. I grabbed my binoculars and looked downhill toward Cedar Valley. Things were different there. Their fancy greenbelt was already soaked mulch, turning to sludge. The walking path had puddles the size of kiddie pools. Their retention pond, a decorative little circle near the tennis court, was rising fast, and the water had nowhere to go, because they'd cut the only escape. Around noon, Karen showed up on my driveway in a full-length yellow raincoat, looking like a furious lemon. You need to open that spillway, she screamed over the rain. It's open, I called back. Calm as can be, your end isn't. She stomped up toward the fence line, face wet with rain and rage. This is your fault. You dug too deep. You tampered with flow. You've endangered the entire community. I held up my phone. Smile. This is being recorded. She froze. I stepped forward. You blocked a state-recognized flood channel. You capped a culvert without a permit. You trespassed, sabotaged, and now you're scrambling. Brad's SUV pulled up beside her. Get in the car, Karen, he muttered. But she wasn't done. I'm calling the sheriff. Please do, I said. Ask him to bring Derek Shaw from the water office. He'll want to see what you built. That night, the flood came. Not a wave, not a wall. Just a steady rising surge. The basin below the HOA filled like a bathtub. Their walking paths vanished. The clubhouse lights flickered and went out. Then the water reached the first row of houses. A street lamp sparked and died. From my porch, I watched it all dry, elevated, untouched. And for the first time in days, I smiled. The rain didn't stop. It came down in thick bands, pulsing like breathlight for a minute, then hammering hard the next. By the second day, the neighborhood downhill looked like a forgotten harbor town. Cars floated crooked in driveways. Trash bins bobbed in driveways like toy boats. The HOA clubhouse had water up to the windows, and yet somehow I was still the villain in their story. But I knew that would change soon, because I had proof. The morning after the flood surge peaked, the skies cleared just enough for me to head out. I sloshed down to the edge of my property to the exact spot where the original spillway had been buried. With the trench nearly full, I had to work carefully, but the recent rain had actually helped washing away some of the debris and exposing the sabotage more clearly. I brought my camera. First, I documented the pile of bricks stacked inside the spillway mouth clean-cut hardware store grade. Nothing natural about them. I pulled out a few to show how deep the blockage went. Underneath was a black tarp knotted with twine and jammed into place. Water had tried to break through, but the obstruction held firm. Next, I moved to the far end of the culvert where the HOA had sealed their side. I couldn't cross into their property legally, but I had a telephoto lens and a very clear view from my line. There it was, the concrete slab stained with runoff water pooling around it like a dammed stream. Cracks had formed already. The pressure was building. Their entire floodplain was suffocating. That's when I noticed something else: boot prints. Fresh ones, leading from my side of the trench toward the HOA's side, right where the sabotage had taken place. The ground was soft from the rain, and the tread pattern was distinct. Work boots, heavy duty, but smaller than mine. A second set trailed behind, deeper, heavier. At one point, I saw a scuff where someone had slipped in the mud. I followed them back uphill and stopped cold. There, under the edge of a bush near my fence, was a discarded tool bag, half open, caked in mud. I pulled it out carefully. Inside, a crowbar, 2 trowels, a folding shovel, a sealed pouch containing concrete epoxy, and tucked in the side pocket, a Cedar Valley HOA contractor badge, issued to B. Mendez, Brian, again. By noon, I had it all laid out on my workshop table. The photos, the maps, the weather forecast, the tool bag, the badge, the letter they'd sent blaming me, the camera footage of men sneaking onto my property, and now physical evidence left behind in their rush to flee the scene before the storm. I sent it all in a folder to 2 places. 1, the County Water Management Office. 2, my attorney, Alan Strickland, who owed me a favor from back when I helped him win a case against a corrupt HOA in Georgia. Then I sat back and waited. I didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, a county engineer truck pulled up. 2 men in reflective vests and clipboards stepped out, accompanied by Derek Shaw. He waved at me. You were right. They examined the trench, took soil samples, and measured the depth of the blockage. Derek pointed at the lower end of the spillway. The HOA capped it without authorization. That's a Class 2 violation under state code. One of the other men added, and it caused structural flooding across multiple properties. Document everything Derek said. The county will file an injunction. I gave them the tool bag and badge. They photographed it, then bagged it as evidence. They're going to wish they'd just left your land alone, one of them muttered. Later that evening, I heard the sirens. 4 police cruisers, 1 unmarked vehicle, and 2 emergency utility trucks rolled into Cedar Valley. They weren't speeding, but they weren't wasting time either. I watched from a distance as officers cordoned off the clubhouse. 2 board members were escorted outside. Karen was not among them. Then a large black SUV pulled into her driveway. She came out yelling. I couldn't hear her words, but her gestures were sharp and panicked. When an officer held up a printout, probably a copy of the floodplain map, she actually took a step back. Then she spotted me on my porch. We locked eyes. For the first time since this mess began, Karen looked scared. I tipped my hat. The next morning, local news vans showed up. Word spread fast, especially when the county released a statement confirming that the HOA had illegally altered flood infrastructure and that their actions directly led to residential flooding. They used words like reckless negligence, unauthorized modifications, and pending investigation. Karen tried to do damage control. She gave a short press conference in front of her porch claiming they were only trying to beautify the neighborhood and that some individuals took initiative without proper clearance. But then came the knockout blow. Footage aired of HOA board members digging near the spillway the night before the flood. My security cam had caught it all-time stamped high-res, irrefutable. The reporter summarized it best: this may be the first time in county history that a homeowner's private security system helped expose a systemic HOA cover-up of a flood prevention failure. By the end of the week, HOA members were resigning. Brian Mendez's name disappeared from the directory. The Cedar Valley Facebook group went dark. And Karen Shee lawyered up and disappeared from view. But I wasn't finished. Because while they were floundering in lawsuits and public shame, I had one more card to play. I filed a formal petition with the City Council to reinstate and protect the original spillway easement as a designated public safety infrastructure. If approved, it would mean the HOA could no longer touch it. Maintenance became a shared county responsibility, and I would receive financial compensation for preserving the flood corridor on my land. Best of all, Karen's landscaped greenbelt, what used to be a flood basin, would now be reclassified as hazard zone, meaning no HOA events, no gatherings, no picnics, just wet, muddy grass, and permanent signage warning of flood risk. A big, ugly reminder of their arrogance. By the time the county's findings became public, you'd think the HOA board would have been humbled. They weren't. Instead of accepting responsibility, they doubled down, gaslighting their residents, blaming rogue volunteers, and accusing me of manipulating the system. Their official newsletter was filled with legalese and deflection, unverified allegations, temporary infrastructure setbacks, and my personal favorite, Mr. Merrick's claims are currently under independent review and should not be regarded as fact. It was surreal. The homes were still drying out. 2 families had been displaced, and their new Serenity space now smelled like algae and soaked mulch. The HOA clubhouse had to shut down indefinitely for mold remediation, and the storm wasn't even over yet, just a lull before the second wave. The air was thick with humidity and something else, denial. So I decided to make things very, very public. I printed 40 copies of a report I'd written, Failure to Maintain a Spillway's Death and the Flood That Followed. It had everything: photos, maps, timestamps, drone images, and annotated blueprints from the original county flood plan. I printed them on heavy cardstock, bound each with a red cover, and hand-delivered them to every mailbox in Cedar Valley. I didn't say a word, just watched. By noon the next day, 3 cars had pulled into my driveway, quietly, one by one. All HOA residents. The first was an older couple, water stains still visible on the carpeted trunk of their Lexus. We didn't know, the wife said, her voice tight with emotion. We trusted them. The second was a young dad whose yard now looked like a swamp. He shook my hand hard. I'll speak at the next town hall. This isn't over. The third didn't say anything, just nodded, took a picture of my report with his phone, and drove away. But not everyone was grateful. That evening, as dusk fell, I heard footsteps outside. I opened my door to find a stack of my reports burning in a fire pit someone had dragged onto my gravel drive. Smoke curled up like an accusation. A rock sat next to it with the word liar, spray painted in red. I extinguished the flames, took more photos, and called the sheriff not to file a complaint, but to document it. Again. They were getting desperate and scared, and storms make desperate people stupid. The next HOA board meeting was their last chance to do the right thing. It was held in a temporary tent next to the ruined clubhouse under dim LED floodlights. I arrived early with Derek Shaw, my attorney Alan Strickland, and 2 neighbors who had lost their basements to the flood. The turnout was bigger than usual, at least 50 people, many holding soggy copies of my report. Karen showed up late. She looked exhausted, but her posture screamed defiance. Red blazer clipboard, and that brittle smile like everything was under control. She opened the meeting with a weak statement about rebuilding with strength and weathering this together. Then she launched into a carefully worded speech about restructuring the HOA's safety committee. I stood and interrupted her. Madam Chair, I said loud enough for everyone to hear, what's the updated plan for restoring the original spillway? A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Karen didn't blink. Mr. Merrick, as you are not a member of this association, you are not entitled to speak. I am entitled to speak, I replied, holding up the county-approved flood map. Because this board knowingly destroyed a regulated flood channel, and now the state is watching. Gasps. Someone took out their phone to film. Karen's eyes darted to Brad, who stood frozen behind her. She cleared her throat. We are currently reviewing our landscaping modifications and working with a team of consultants to ensure all community enhancements meet safety standards. I took a slow step forward. Karen, there are children living in homes that nearly flooded to their bedroom windows. Your landscaping enhancement buried the only thing keeping them dry. You had warnings, you had maps, and I told you. Repeatedly. Another neighbor stood up at a woman with a sling on her arm. My son has asthma. We were stuck in that house with black water and no power. How dare you call that an enhancement? Brad tried to regain control. We ask everyone to remain calm. No, said the young father next to me. It's time we stop being calm. We trusted you. You buried a damn spillway. The tent was buzzing now. Someone shouted, Resign! Another voice. This isn't over. Karen's smile cracked. The meeting is adjourned. She stepped back and walked off into the night. But the damage was done. The next day, the local paper ran a headline, HOA leadership under fire for ignoring flood warnings. My name wasn't in the article, but my maps were. The paper had picked up my report, verified it with the county, and even ran a side-by-side graphic of the spillway before and after the HOA's interference. They'd titled it, What Could Have Been Avoided. Calls for Karen's resignation flooded the neighborhood forums. A petition to dissolve the board altogether hit over 100 signatures in 24 hours. Someone printed yard signs that said, Restore the spillway, replace the board. And then the rain came back. I felt it before I heard it, barometric pressure dropping sky, turning metallic leaves twitching like they wanted to flee. Storm number 2 arrived with a vengeance. Unlike the last one, this wasn't a slow build. This was fast, violent, and unforgiving. Thunder cracked so hard, it rattled the panes in my barn. The wind bent the treetops sideways. Rain came down like sheets of nails, and the water started rising, fast. I turned on my floodlights and watched the channel swell. The blockage still held, but barely. My own runoff system worked flawlessly, every trench and culvert doing its job. But below me, Cedar Valley was drowning again. The HOA board had ignored my warnings. Now nature was making her own statement, and this time she wasn't whispering. She was roaring. The storm moved in like a freight train. No slow drizzle, no polite warning. Just a wall of wind and water that battered Cedar Valley from every side, as if the heavens had finally lost their patience. The sky turned the color of bruised steel. Trees bowed. Roof shingles took flight, and the spillway, what was left of it, was gasping under the weight of everything they'd done wrong. From my porch, I watched the first signs of failure. At the far edge of the HOA's greenbelt, the ground began to pulse, literally pulse like a heartbeat. You wouldn't notice it unless you were looking for it. But I'd seen that kind of movement before in the clay-soaked banks of unstable reservoirs. It was the earth trying to push back against trapped water-like lungs, desperate to exhale. And just past that patch of pulsing soil stood the HOA's prized community gazebo. It had been built over the exact spot the old flood channel used to resurface. I grabbed my binoculars. The retention pond, if you could still call it that, was over capacity. Water lapped at the sidewalks. Storm drains burped and gurgled, unable to keep up. I spotted a woman standing near her porch steps, barefoot in ankle-deep water, cradling a child. This wasn't a puddle anymore. This was a warning shot. At 10:17 p.m., the first sinkhole opened. It wasn't massive, not yet. Just a sudden loud crack and a rush of soil disappearing into the dark. Right beneath the HOA's flower garden. A young tree tilted sideways, then vanished. The ground swallowed a stone bench. Then, like a wound, it sealed with a frothy swirl of muddy water. It took exactly 12 minutes for a second sinkhole to follow, this time on the edge of the main cul-de-sac. The greenbelt was failing. Their plan, if it could even be called that, was unraveling in real time. I texted Derek Shaw from the county office. Sinkholes forming in HOA common areas. Greenbelt collapsing. Flood photos incoming. He replied almost instantly, I'm mobilizing response crews. If they altered any more channels, this could trigger a state-level flood alert. I attached 2 photos and a video clip. Rain pounded on the lens, but you could still see the fountain in their center park erupting not with gentle spray, but with brown surging runoff. It looked like a geyser. It wasn't supposed to do that. Then I got a knock on my door. It was Karen. soaked, pale. Her perfect bob clung to her cheeks like seaweed. The red blazer was long gone. She wore a poncho inside out and held a dripping folder in one hand. "Russell," she said, her voice rasping. "Please." "Open the door. I just waited. We need to open the spillway," she said. "We were wrong." "See that now?" Her voice cracked. "Families are trapped. Some of the new homes don't have sump pumps. Brad's basement is underwater. The park's caving in." She held out the folder like a white flag. Inside, I could see their original construction schematics, the ones they tried to keep private. I stepped outside under the roofline and crossed my arms. "It's too late for please, Karen." She didn't speak. I pointed toward the trench behind the barn. "That pipe you capped, it's holding back 500,000 gallons right now. If we breach it wrong, it won't drain. It'll explode." Her lip trembled. "Then what do? "You wait," I said. "You wait for the water to teach you what accountability feels like." The next morning, the HOA was a disaster zone. And it wasn't even the worst of it yet. Utility crews had barricaded the neighborhood's southern entrance. Water flooded most streets. Sewer backups made the air thick with rot. The small bridge that connected the HOA to the main road was submerged. A power transformer near the clubhouse blew with a thunderous bang, sparks raining like fireworks over the dark lake below. And yes, by now, it was a lake. Not a metaphor. Not an exaggeration, an actual growing lake. The low-lying design of Cedar Valley had turned their dream neighborhood into a shallow bowland. With no drainage outlet, the water just kept rising. A few brave souls had started evacuating in kayaks. One man used an inflatable pool float to ferry his groceries to higher ground. Another family waded out with their golden retriever in a laundry basket. And through it all, the HOA board sent emails. "Remain calm. Help is on the way. Please avoid spreading rumors on social media. We are working with authorities to assess the situation." They still refused to say the word spillway, but everyone else had figured it out. That evening, I received a knock, frantic, not angry, just tired. It was Linda, a retired teacher from down the hill. Her garage had flooded twice in 2 weeks. "We believe them," she said quietly. "We thought they knew what they were doing." "They didn't," I replied. She looked up at me. "But you did." I handed her one of the few remaining printed copies of my report. "You were never the outsider, Russell," she whispered. They were. By nightfall, more sinkholes opened. 2 front lawns sank. A sidewalk cracked and caved. A storm drain collapsed entirely, sending a parked sedan tilting into the mud. Still, the HOA hadn't reopened the spillway. They couldn't not, without admitting what they'd done, and they were boxed in by their pride. And water, unlike people, doesn't care about your narrative. It just rises. I walked the edge of my property, watching as frogs croaked on newly formed banks, as turtles climbed fences they hadn't seen before. My land was green, elevated, calm. Water flowed around it like I'd always intended. They had mocked my planning, mocked my warnings. Now they were living in the consequence. And nature had only just begun to speak. While Cedar Valley scrambled, I got to work. I didn't gloat, I didn't post photos, I didn't shout "I told you so" on the neighborhood forum. I just reinforced my land methodically, deliberately, like a man preparing for war who knows the battlefield better than the generals. Because I did. I started with the eastern slope. That hill was the most vulnerable to overflow if the HOA's basin failed completely. I dug a secondary channel just 2 feet wide, curved like a question mark, lined it with gravel, and angled it to feed back into the lower marshland. Nature's sponge. Next, I reinforced the barn foundation, laid down another layer of vapor barrier, re-anchored the rear gutter system, and added 2 new rain barrels over 100 gallons each. My generator, elevated on a concrete pad, was ready with a full propane tank. I ran a dry test just after dusk. Flawless. Inside, I moved critical supplies to the loft. And then, I walked the property line, quietly marking every runoff path, every weak point in the soil. The land and I had a language. Every squish, crackle, and trickle meant something. I listened. It told me exactly what to expect. Meanwhile, the HOA spun stories like a spiderweb catching fire. Their newsletter claimed the flooding was unexpected and due to unseasonal rainfall patterns. They held a resilience rally in front of the clubhouse, even though it was still half submerged. Karen appeared in boots and a plastic smile, handing out bottled water to residents as if she hadn't orchestrated their disaster. But people weren't buying it anymore. Word had spread. My report was circulating on Reddit. Local news picked it up again. A regional weather channel featured Cedar Valley as a case study in suburban storm mismanagement. They aired drone footage of the neighborhood underwater side by side, with archival maps showing the former spillway path. Even without my name in the story, everyone knew where the truth came from. 2 days before the next rain system was set to hit, I received a letter from FEMA. It was brief, subject flood risk evaluation. Property assessment, Mr. Merrick. Your property has been identified as a critical drainage buffer zone during recent flood incidents. Your prior adherence to topographical integrity has mitigated regional damage. We request a field inspection for documentation purposes and possible federal designation as a protected runoff corridor. Please contact our office to schedule access. I read it 3 times, then I smiled. When the FEMA inspector arrived, I recognized her immediately. Danielle Wu, a field agent I'd worked with in Arkansas a decade ago during the levee inspections, smart, steady, all business. She stepped out of her white pickup in cargo pants and boots, not fazed by the mud. Didn't expect to see you on a civilian form, she said with a smirk. I didn't expect to be rescuing a neighborhood from itself, I replied. She surveyed the trench, took photos, scribbled notes. When we reached the blockage where the HOA had buried the spillway, she knelt down and shook her head. They really did this, she asked. Concrete, plastic, and logs. They called it landscaping. She whistled softly. They turned a flood bypass into a compost pile. Then she stood and looked out over the shimmering lake that used to be Cedar Valley's Central Park. You kept yours clean. I knew they wouldn't, I said. She paused. You know, if this breach gets worse, we may need to cut an emergency channel through your side to relieve pressure. I've already dug one, I said, pointing to the hill. She blinked, then laughed. Of course you have. That night, the wind picked up again. A different kind of wind, low and constant, as if the sky itself was breathing through clenched teeth. I slept in the barn loft with my radio tuned to NOAA alerts, one eye always half open, the other dreaming of storms I'd seen, and storms still coming. Downhill, the HOA was a different world. They were frantic. Generators hummed around the clock. Extension cords snaked through open windows. Kayaks were tied to porch railings like lifeboats. Someone even spray-painted help on the clubhouse roof in neon orange. It would have been comical if it weren't so dangerous. They were cornered by their own pride, and the water didn't care. Karen showed up again at sunrise. She didn't knock this time. Just stood at the edge of my fence, holding her clipboard like a shield eyes, heavy with something new to defeat. We need to open it, she said. I didn't move. The spillway. It's the only chance we've got. I leaned against the post. You told me it was obsolete. You said I was dangerous. I was wrong. And her voice dropped. We're asking for your help. A beat of silence stretched between us. Then I nodded once. With FEMA's blessing, I began clearing the blockage with proper equipment. Danielle supervised. We worked for 8 hours straight, removing logs, breaking concrete, excavating the capped culvert. As we worked, neighbors gathered on the ridge, watching quietly. Some held umbrellas. Others just stood in the mist, uncertain. But no one interrupted. When we pulled the last section free, water surged forward, not violently, but with weight, purpose. The way it had always meant to move. It carved its path back through the land like it had never left. Downhill, the lake began to shift. It was working, and they knew it. By dusk, the flow was steady. The water level in Cedar Valley dropped by 6 inches in the first hour. Karen came back eyes wide, voice trembling. Thank you, she said. I looked past her toward the families bailing out garages, toward the boarded-up clubhouse, and drowned swing set. Then I looked her in the eye. This isn't gratitude, I said. This is accountability. She nodded once and walked away. No more speeches, no more spin. Just the silence of a woman who finally saw what she had broken. The storm didn't roar in. It crept. It started with a quiet drizzle soft enough that folks in Cedar Valley went about their evening like it was nothing. A few stood on porches watching the clouds shift, sipping coffee, like the worst had already passed. Others rolled up hoses, picked up fallen branches, even chuckled about the great HOA lake. But I knew the truth. This wasn't the end. It was the eye. And when the second wall came, it didn't knock. It shattered. At 2:38 a.m., the wind ripped through like a banshee. Rain slammed sideways cold and endless. I jolted awake in the loft as the barn trembled, the tin roof above, rattling like a freight train. I slipped on boots, grabbed my flashlight, and peered through the slats. The channel I'd reopened behind the barn churned like a beast. The water gushed through with so much force it sprayed 10 feet past the spillway mouth, tumbling over rocks, hissing like steam. But it held. Everything on my land was working. I climbed to the ridge with my binoculars and aimed them at the HOA. What I saw was biblical. Water rushed down every cul-de-sac like veins. The central park was gone, transformed into a swirling black lagoon. Street signs barely peeked out from the current. The HOA's beloved community gazebo, built right over the sealed spillway, was floating disconnected from its foundation and slowly spinning like a toy in a bathtub. I scanned to the left. A sedan drifted nose down into a neighbor's rose garden. To the right, solar-powered pathway lights flickered underwater, blinking like drowning stars. And above it all, the clubhouse stood at the edge of collapse, shrouded in fog lights out its doors wide open, the water licking its base. They were completely, utterly underwater. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Danielle Wu, the FEMA agent. Confirmed satellite footage of full-scale submersion. Cedar Valley has entered active federal disaster zone status. Emergency crews inbound. Hang tight. I looked back at the scene. No amount of spin or HOA newsletter could hide this now. Around 4:00 a.m., the screams started. Not of panic, of desperation. From my ridge, I saw cell phone lights blinking in the dark, people waving from second-story windows. One man on his roof shining a flashlight into the sky like a beacon. Another trying to paddle a trash can like a raft, futile against the weight of the storm. I grabbed my radio. "County Dispatch, this is Russell Merrick," I said. "Reporting visual confirmation of multiple trapped residents in the Cedar Valley subdivision. Coordinates following." I rattled them off. "Understood," the voice replied. "We're deploying SAR teams, ETA 30, search and rescue." Good. But they'd never make it in time for everyone. At sunrise, I was still on my feet. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. Just stood watch as the water claimed everything they thought was permanent. Fences, hedges, sidewalks, cars. Brad Whitmore's pristine Tesla gone. Karen's ornamental koi pond. A swirling mess of mud and plastic. The HOA's monument stone engraved with pride. Peace, progress, cracked in half. Then I got another knock at the fence. It was Karen, soaked, shaking, her eyes red, her voice small. "There's a family trapped near lot 19, she said. Mom, dad, 3 kids. They tried to drive out and got stuck on the bridge. Water's over the hood. They're screaming for help." I didn't say a word. Just walked to the barn, grabbed my long aluminum canoe, the one I'd kept mounted for over a decade, and pulled it down. Karen watched me. "I'll go with you," she offered. I looked her dead in the eye. "No, you've done enough." Then I hoisted the canoe onto my shoulder and disappeared into the rain. The current fought me at every turn. Debris floated in from all directions. Plastic chairs, fence boards, a barbecue grill. I paddled hard, weaving between obstacles, breath-ragged arms burning. And then I saw them. The SUV sat at a sharp angle, its front buried in water, back tires barely above. A woman clung to the roof rack, 2 kids on either side, one crying uncontrollably. A man stood waist-deep, holding up a third child, his face twisted in panic. "Help's here," I shouted. I steered hard, slammed the paddle down, and coasted to their side. We loaded the kids first, then the mother. I tied a line to the father and had him grip the stern as I paddled back toward high ground. It took 15 minutes, but felt like a lifetime. When we reached the rise of my land, I helped them out. They collapsed in the grass, crying, shivering, whispering thanks I barely heard. Karen arrived 10 minutes later. She tried to speak, but the mother lunged at her, screaming, "You let this happen. You told us we didn't need flood insurance." The father stepped between them, holding his wife back. Karen couldn't look at them. She turned away, shoulders hunched. I watched her walk back toward the lake her lies had built. By mid-morning, helicopters arrived. Boats, too. The National Guard rolled in with sandbags and radios and clipboards. They asked questions, took statements, and every one of them pointed back to the same word, spillway, the thing they destroyed, the thing that could have saved them. A few hours later, a FEMA truck parked in my driveway. Danielle stepped out, water-stained boots splashing against gravel. "Congratulations," she said, handing me a folder. "Your land's officially designated as a federal floodway buffer zone." I nodded. "I've also been authorized to inform you," she added, "that Cedar Valley HOA is under investigation for multiple violations, environmental, civil, and criminal." She paused. "And that includes Karen Delaney, Brad Whitmore, and Brian Mendez." That night, I stood at the edge of the ridge once more. The floodwater had begun to retreat, slow and heavy, dragging with it the evidence of power misused and warnings ignored. Cedar Valley would never be the same. But I was still standing, because I had listened to the land, because I had respected it, and because when pride built walls, I kept my spillway open. Karen used to walk like she owned the street, back straight, chin high, blazer buttoned, lips pursed, in permanent disapproval. The kind of woman who could issue a violation notice just by raising one eyebrow. She'd spent years shaping Cedar Valley, in her image dictating lawn heights, garage paint colors, even the number of bird feeders allowed on a property. But the woman who came to me that morning wasn't the same. She didn't walk, she stumbled. Her hair clung to her face in wet strands, her once sharp eyes red and swollen. No clipboard, no power heels, just soggy jeans, mismatched boots, and a trembling voice. "Please," she rasped, barely louder than the wind. "Russell, Dick, and don't know what to do anymore." I didn't say a word. Not at first. She stood there in silence, soaked to the bone, clutching a soaked manila folder like it held her soul. "FEMA's recommending emergency management take over," she said finally. They're investigating us. Brad's already resigned. Brian disappeared." I raised an eyebrow. "You think that folder will fix this?" She opened it with shaking fingers. Inside documents, revised runoff plans, apology drafts, even an unsigned letter of resignation. "I'll step down," she whispered. "I'll go on camera. Take the blame. Just please help me fix this. I can't make it stop." The rain had finally slowed to a mist, but her voice cracked like thunder. I took the folder and thumbed through the papers. It was too late. Not just for her position, but for her character. She hadn't come to apologize weeks ago when I warned her. She hadn't stepped aside when the first flood swallowed the streets. She didn't beg when the second wave hit, and families were stuck on rooftops. She waited until she was drowning. "You didn't listen," I said calmly. "Not to the maps, not to the land, not to me." Her chin quivered. "I was trying to protect the neighborhood. You buried a flood channel to build a picnic bench." She flinched like I'd slapped her. "We had committees, Russell, procedures. Everyone voted. Everyone trusted you." Her eyes filled, but I wasn't finished. "You shamed me, lied about me, accused me of endangering lives while you were the one choking off the only safety valve this place had." Karen's knees buckled slightly. "People are going to lose their homes," I said. "Some already have. And FEMA's going to trace every drop of damage back to your signature. I didn't think it would happen this way." "You never do," I replied. "That's how disasters work. They wait for pride to build a stage." She sat down on the gravel legs, giving out, no longer pretending to be composed. "I lost everything," she whispered. "You had everything I said. And you gambled it for control." She nodded, slow, dazed. "They're calling me HOA Karen online." I didn't answer. "They're screenshotting my emails, making memes." Still, I said nothing. "I deserve it, don't I?" she asked, almost childlike. "I'm not here to punish you," I said. "That part's already done." A silence settled between us. Not just quiet, but the kind of stillness that follows something enormous falling apart. Then Karen stood, slowly brushed gravel off her hands, and looked me in the eye. "Will you testify?" she asked. "When the investigation begins?" "Yes." Her eyes closed. Her shoulders dropped. Then, with a final nod, she turned and walked away slowly, deliberately, into the heart of the neighborhood she helped drown. Later that afternoon, I got a knock from the press. A local reporter, maybe mid-20s raincoat, Still dripping eyes wide with the kind of adrenaline only found in disaster, stood at my gate. "Mr. Merrick," he asked, "can I ask you a few questions?" I nodded. We stood beneath my porch as he recorded with a handheld mic. "How long have you known about the spillway?" "Decades," I said. "Helped survey it back in the 70s. Maintained it since I bought the land. Did you warn the HOA more than once? They ignored me. Then they sabotaged it." He paused. "Do you feel vindicated?" "No." "Why not?" I looked out toward the drowned streets where a child's plastic tricycle floated past a mailbox. "Because people still lost homes." He lowered the mic. "And because no one listened until the water did the talking." That night, FEMA trucks returned with portable lights and temporary shelters. The HOA board was suspended. A federal safety review began. The mayor issued a statement promising stricter development reviews moving forward. But the residents, they came to me. Some brought food. Others brought tools. A few just came to sit. "I should have listened," one man said, voice cracking. "We all should have." I didn't gloat. Just handed him a shovel and pointed to a section of washed-out fence. "You can start there," I said. Karen didn't return. The last I heard, she'd left the state. Some said she moved in with her sister. Others claimed she changed her name. The HOA's documents disappeared from public record under pending litigation. But her legacy, it stayed behind. A warped picnic bench, a rusted sign half submerged in a ditch, and the sound of water always, moving, always watching. The lake took its time retreating. Even after the pumps arrived, even after the sun came back, it clung to the earth like a memory that didn't want to be forgotten. And every morning, I stood on my ridge, watching, listening, because I knew something they never did. You don't control nature. You only respect it. And if you don't, it will teach you, one flood at a time. You'd think the arrival of FEMA would look like helicopters and chaos, but it didn't. It came in the form of clipboards, boots, and quiet authority. No yelling, no cameras, just a team of people who had seen disasters in every corner of the country and immediately recognized when one was man-made. They walked Cedar Valley with measured steps, took photos of the sunken park, the collapsed gazebo, the warped sidewalks still oozing water. They asked calm questions, interviewed residents, measured, mapped, documented. And when they knocked on my door again, they brought a folder full of names. Danielle Wu stood on my porch, her boots caked in silt. "I thought you should see this first," she said. She handed me a printed summary, Federal Violation Report, Cedar Valley, HOA, status, active investigation, unauthorized modification of flood infrastructure, negligent landscaping over regulated spillway, trespassing and vandalism of private property, knowingly disseminating false flood safety information, failure to comply with emergency drainage protocols, named parties, Karen Delaney, Brad Whitmore, Brian Mendez. I looked up. "They're finished," she said. "And it's not just civil. The EPA is involved now." I exhaled slowly. I'd waited weeks for this, maybe longer, but I didn't feel triumph, just quiet justice. That afternoon, I stood at the community meeting, not in the clubhouse, which was still cordoned off with caution tape, but in a temporary FEMA tent pitched right on the HOA's once manicured soccer field. It was packed. Some residents were waiters. Others sat on overturned buckets. Everyone looked tired, but not defeated. I stepped to the front when my name was called. Derek Shaw, from the County Flood Office, introduced me Russell Merrickland-Owner hydrology expert, and frankly, the reason this neighborhood didn't lose more. There was a murmur of appreciation. I unfolded a simple map. No PowerPoint, no theatrics, just truth. I traced the original spillway line with a marker, showed where it was severed, showed where the water pooled, where it broke through, where the sinkholes formed. "Water isn't your enemy," I said. "But pride is, ignorance is, and now you've seen what happens when you try to outvote nature." Silence. Then a hand went up. An older man, eyes red-rimmed from exhaustion. "What do we do now?" I looked around. "You rebuild. But this time you listen to the land. You respect it." "And the HOA?" someone asked. A pause. Then I said simply, "That's not my decision. It's yours." Within a week, the board was dissolved. No election, no debates, just a vote of no confidence signed by over 90% of the residents. The state placed Cedar Valley under a temporary oversight board. FEMA allocated emergency funds for infrastructure repair, and the county redrew the floodplain maps to officially classify my land as a regional runoff zone. It would never be developed, never be paved. It became what it always was meant to be, a channel for the storm. In the months that followed, the transformation was slow, but real. Where the Greenbelt had been a new stormwater basin was dug twice, as deep fully mapped with emergency overflow back into my channel. The ruined walking paths were converted into wildflower swales. Trees were planted along natural water lines instead of blocking them. And that picnic bench Karen fought so hard to install, gone. Replaced by a simple wooden sign carved with quiet care. This land flows, let it. The people changed too. Neighbors started waving. They brought over baked goods, seedlings, firewood. Some volunteered to help me maintain the spillway, clearing brush, checking flow after heavy rains. One boy even asked me to teach him how to read topographic maps. I did, because they'd learned something Karen never did. You don't protect a community by controlling it. You protect it by understanding it. One evening, a year later, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, no return address, inside a check for $1 signed by Karen Delaney, and a note. You were right about all of it. I'm sorry. Keep the dollar. You've already paid the price. I stared at it for a long time, then folded it, placed it in the same folder as the FEMA report, and slid it into the bottom drawer of my file cabinet. I didn't cash it, but I kept it. Not out of spite, out of reminder. That spring, the rains came again, harder than ever. The kind that would have turned Cedar Valley into a lake all over again if the channel hadn't been cleared, if the basin hadn't been rebuilt, if the people hadn't changed. But this time, the water flowed, right through my land, over gravel, under stone, past the sign, and into safety. I stood at the top of the ridge, watching it go, not stopping it, not fearing it, just letting it move, the way it always wanted to, the way it always should have.